April 16, 1945 began like an ordinary spring morning in central Germany. The sun was out, the air was mild, and the war, at least to the people of Weimar, felt as if it was already fading into the background. If you stood along the road leading out of the city that morning, you would have seen something that looked almost festive. A long column of civilians was moving together, slowly, like a parade. There were hundreds of them. Men wearing tailored suits, polished shoes, fedora hats tilted just so. Women wrapped in fur coats, their lips painted, their heels clicking against the pavement. They looked like they were headed to a concert, a gallery opening, maybe an elegant garden party. They talked among themselves, laughed quietly, complained about the inconvenience. These were not factory workers or refugees. These were the elite of Weimar, the professors, lawyers, doctors, businessmen, and their wives. The cultural aristocracy of Germany. But this was no celebration. They were not walking by choice. On both sides of the column marched American soldiers, uniforms stained with mud, faces hard with exhaustion, fingers resting near the triggers of their M1 Garand rifles. The soldiers did not smile. They did not speak unless necessary. Every few yards, a jeep crawled alongside the civilians, its engine growling, making it clear that no one was turning back. The destination was a wooded hill called the Ettersberg, about 5 miles away. At the top of that hill was a place the citizens of Weimar insisted they knew nothing about. A place they had lived beside for 8 years without acknowledging its existence. A place called Buchenwald. As they walked, the complaints began. Why are we being forced to do this? This is outrageous. My shoes are ruined. My feet hurt. Some muttered that this was an American propaganda stunt. Others insisted it was all exaggerated. They reassured one another that they were innocent, that they had done nothing wrong, that whatever this was, it couldn't possibly be as bad as the rumors. But 2 days earlier, General George S. Patton had walked through Buchenwald himself. And after what he saw there, he no longer believed in the innocence of Weimar. Patton had seen the ovens. He had seen the piles of corpses. He had seen the small zoo the SS had built for their amusement. Animals fed and cared for while human beings starved to death just beyond the fences. He had seen enough to understand that the claim, "we didn't know," was not ignorance. It was a lie. Patton was not interested in polite denials. He wanted to destroy them. If the citizens said they didn't know, then he would make sure they knew. If they claimed innocence, he would drag that innocence up a hill and force it to look directly into the abyss. He wanted the most educated, cultured people in Germany to confront what had been done in their name, 5 miles from their homes. And so he ordered the parade. To understand why this mattered so deeply, you have to understand what Weimar was supposed to represent. Weimar was not just another German city. It was the soul of German culture. This was the city of Goethe and Schiller. A city of poets, philosophers, libraries, and theaters. It was the birthplace of the Bauhaus movement, a center of art, music, and intellectual life. The people of Weimar believed themselves to be civilized in a way that set them apart. They listened to Beethoven. They read philosophy. They debated ideas in cafes and strolled through manicured parks. They believed barbarism was something that happened elsewhere, among less enlightened people. And yet, just 5 miles away, hidden behind trees on a scenic hill, was a factory of death. Buchenwald concentration camp was established in 1937. For 8 years, it operated in plain sight. SS officers lived comfortably nearby. Their wives shopped in Weimar stores, attended concerts, walked the same streets. The smoke from the crematorium drifted across the countryside. Ash settled on rooftops and windowsills. Prisoners marched through nearby rail lines in striped uniforms, their bodies reduced to bone and skin. And when asked about it, the citizens of Weimar all said the same thing. Wir haben es nicht gewusst. We didn't know. They said the smoke came from factories. They said the prisoners were criminals or volunteers. They said they never asked questions. They lived inside a carefully maintained bubble of denial. That bubble burst on April 11, 1945. When units of the U.S. Third Army reached the area, the SS fled. Those prisoners who were still alive, barely, rose up and took control of the camp themselves. When Patton arrived days later, he thought he was prepared. He had already seen another camp, Ohrdruf. He believed nothing could shock him anymore. He was wrong. Buchenwald was enormous. More than 20,000 prisoners were still alive inside when it was liberated. Walking skeletons. Men weighing barely 60 pounds. Children with hollow eyes who had forgotten how to smile. The stench of death was overwhelming, so strong that hardened soldiers gagged and vomited as they walked through the gates. Patton saw piles of naked bodies stacked like firewood in the courtyard, their yellowed skin stretched tight over bones, eyes open, mouths frozen in silent screams. This was not a battlefield. This was something else entirely. Patton, a man known for his toughness, wrote later that he had never felt so sick in his life. "This is not war," he wrote. "This is madness." What enraged him most was what he saw beyond the fences. In nearby fields, German civilians were plowing land, hanging laundry, living ordinary lives. They were close enough to smell death every day, and yet they claimed ignorance. Patton turned to one of his officers and asked, "Do the people in that town know about this?" "They say they don't, General," the officer replied. Patton's face turned red. He slammed his riding crop against his boot. "They are lying," he said, "and I am going to prove it." He summoned the provost marshal and issued an order unlike anything else in the war. He didn't want a symbolic visit from a mayor or a few officials. He wanted the people who mattered. The richest. The most respected. The cultural elite. "Go into Weimar," Patton ordered. "Find the professors, the lawyers, the businessmen, the wives of the politicians. Round up 1,000 of them." American MPs moved into the city that same day. They knocked on the doors of grand villas. They entered shops and cafes. They told stunned civilians to put on their coats. "You're going for a walk," they said. "General Patton invites you to visit your neighbors." Some protested. One man shouted that he was a doctor and could not be ordered around. The MP answered by pointing his rifle. "Start walking." The column formed, and the march began. At first, the mood among the Germans was almost casual. They talked among themselves. Some women adjusted their hair and makeup. They treated it like an annoyance, a strange American gesture that would soon be over. Some even smiled at the cameras following along. It took about 2 hours to reach the top of Ettersberg Hill. Halfway up, the wind shifted. The smell hit them first. Not the sharp smell of decay, but something worse. Old death. Heavy, greasy, stale. It clung to the air and coated the back of the throat. Conversations stopped. Faces tightened. Handkerchiefs came out. Perfumed scarves were pressed to noses. The MPs did not let them stop. At the top of the hill stood the iron gate of Buchenwald. Its inscription read, "Jedem das Sein, to each his own." A final, cruel joke. The civilians passed through the gate and stepped into a world they had pretended did not exist. The first thing they saw was the prisoners. Thousands of them stood silently behind barbed wire, watching. These were the men and boys the citizens claimed were imaginary. The prisoners did not shout. They did not move. They simply stared. That stare broke something. American soldiers guided the civilians toward the crematorium. In the courtyard stood a trailer piled high with naked bodies, limbs tangled together, mouths open. The color drained from the civilians' faces. One woman began to tremble, then screamed, then collapsed into the mud. An MP nudged her with his boot. "Get up," he said. "You haven't seen anything yet." The civilians were forced to walk past the bodies. If someone turned away, a soldier grabbed their chin and forced their head back. "Look," they shouted. "Look at what you did." Inside the pathology building, tables were laid out with objects the SS had collected. Shrunken heads. Pieces of tattooed human skin. Souvenirs. The commandant's wife, Ilse Koch, had ordered prisoners killed so their skin could be turned into lampshades. The men in suits wept openly. Some vomited. An American officer spoke calmly in perfect German. "You say you didn't know," he said. "These were made here while you went to the theater." The tour continued. They saw the quarantine barracks where prisoners were left to die of typhus. The smell was unbearable. Even American soldiers wore masks. The civilians were not allowed to. At one point, a former prisoner approached a well-dressed banker and pointed at him. "I remember you," the prisoner said. "You saw me. You looked away." The banker collapsed to his knees, sobbing that he didn't know. No one believed him. When the tour ended, the people of Weimar walked back down the hill in silence. No smiles. No conversation. Their city of poets waited below, unchanged, but they were not. Word of Patton's action reached Eisenhower. He did not reprimand him. He expanded the order. He demanded that journalists, politicians, and editors be brought to the camps. He wanted witnesses. "I made the visit deliberately," Eisenhower said, "to be able to give first-hand evidence if anyone ever claims this was propaganda." That night, back in Weimar, some of those who had marched committed suicide. The shame was too much. Patton was told. He did not celebrate. He simply said, "Good. Maybe the rest will learn." The parade of shame remains one of the most haunting moments of the war. It asks a question that still matters today. How much does the average citizen know? And how much do they choose not to know? The people of Weimar were not the executioners. But they were the ones who looked away. And on that day in April 1945, they were forced to look. They walked up the hill as aristocrats. They walked down as accomplices. And the shadow of Buchenwald followed them home.